Eliphaz the Temanite seems to think if you looked up wicked man in the dictionary, you'd find Job's picture next to it. Let's open up the Bible and think on these things. For the Word of Truth Ministry Video Library, I am Nathan C. Johnson, Bible teacher. I greet you in the faith and fellowship of our great God and Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ, whose we are, whom we love, and whom we serve. Let's open our Bibles to Job 15. And today we are considering the second address to Job of Eliphaz the Temanite. And he tries to answer Job's reasoning, as he's reasoned so far in their argument. And then he discusses God's dealings as he sees them. So Job 15 and verse 1. Then answered Eliphaz the Temanite and said. So again, this is his second address, and I believe we'll see this argument takes place. His three friends each have three addresses. And Job answers each one with 9 answers. One for each of his three friends, 3 addresses. So this is Eliphaz's second. Verse 2, and again, I am reading from E.W. Bullinger's poetic metric version, lyrical version of Job. Job 15, verse 2. A wise man, should he give vain knowledge forth, or fill himself with words like blustering wind? So he refers to Job's arguments as empty ruach. And the Hebrew word ruach is the word that we often translate spirit. Yet it means an invisible thing, and is also used by the Hebrews for wind. So what he means here, giving vain knowledge forth, he means windy knowledge. Job is just speaking windy knowledge. In other words, there's nothing to it. It's just puffs of air. Or fill himself with words like blustering wind or like the east wind. He talks about him just filling himself with the words, pouring out his words. And he's basically making fun of Job because Job's answers to their arguments are all longer than their addresses. He tries to make out our addresses are short and pithy, but Job, you just keep pouring out words. And so your words are just a bunch of windy knowledge because they're all longer than what we have to say. Verse 3, should he contend with words of no avail, or speeches wherewith he can do no good? He says, should a wise man do what you're doing, Job? And of course his implication is, no, you shouldn't. No wise person would do what you're doing, Job. Should a wise man just contend, argue with words that are of no avail, words that do no good? They don't accomplish anything, they don't succeed. Or with speeches wherewith he can do no good? Well, it's always nice if you're arguing a point with someone and that person decides to rate your arguments, like they're the judge determining whether your arguments are good arguments or not. And so they judge your arguments and you give them the thumbs down. And I've certainly argued with some people on biblical matters, and they've done that to me. They've come back and rated my arguments and said, Nathan, I'd give your arguments 2 thumbs down. Of course, they don't say it exactly like that, but that's their point. They rate my argument and decide it's a bad one. Well, that's a nice thing to do when you're in an argument with someone, is decide you can now be the judge and rate the other person's argument. And usually, I rather feel that I've had the better argument. But, they decide to rate my argument and give it a thumbs down. That's what Eliphaz does with Job's argument here. Verse 4, but thou wouldst make void the fear of God, and weaken all devotion due to him. So he accuses Job now of making void reverence for El, the mighty God. So he claims your arguments, Job, about God would make no one fear God. Well, what does he mean? Well, Job is insisting that fearing God and doing the right thing didn't result in him having a happy life and nothing bad happened to him. And so what does Eliphaz say? Well, if people listened to you, Job, they'd all stop fearing God. Notice implying that no one would fear God unless it was for the motivation of making sure that everything would go well for him. That if you knew if I didn't fear God, my life wouldn't be any worse off anyway, well then why would I fear God? I just fear God so that my life will be better. If my life wasn't better, I'd stop fearing him. Now this is interesting that Eliphaz says this, or at least implies this, because remember, this was Satan's very argument when he stood before Jehovah. Back in Job chapter 1, he said to Jehovah, "Doth Job fear God for naught? Hast not thou made an hedge about him, and about his house, and about all that he hath on every side? Thou hast blessed the work of his hands, and his substance is increased in the land. But put forth thine hand now, and touch all that he hath, and he will curse thee to thy face." So Satan claims the only reason, God, that Job or anyone else serves you is to get stuff out of you. Why, if you brought Job calamity instead of good, he'd curse you to your face. No one would serve you if he didn't give something out of it, if you didn't bribe him into doing it. And notice Eliphaz seems to have the same reasoning. Job, if what you said was right, if serving God didn't guarantee a good and happy life, why, that would make void fearing God and weaken devotion due to him. So notice the similarity between Eliphaz's argument and Satan's. And again, as I've said before, Job's three friends, whether they were sincere or not, and certainly Peter was sincere when he told Christ that, the things you said will never happen to you, and Christ said to him, "Get thee behind me, Satan." Peter thought he just wanted what was good for Christ, but he was making Satan's argument. And these friends perhaps think what they're saying would be good for Job. It'd be good if he'd listen. But really they're making Satan's argument, and we see it very clearly here. When he makes the very same argument Satan did, that to say serving God doesn't automatically mean your life will go well, weakens all motivation to serve him. That's why people serve him. Verse 5, "Thy mouth declares thine own iniquity, and thou thyself dost choose the crafty tongue." So he says, your words, Job, have revealed what a bad person you are, how iniquitous you are. What you've said reveals it. Only a bad person would say things like you said, Job. It's clear you chose a crafty, deceitful tongue, because otherwise somebody with a crafty, deceitful tongue would say arguments like you made, Job. Verse 6, "Thine own mouth, and not I, doth thee condemn. Yea, thine own lips against thee testify." So he says, I don't even have to accuse you, Job. I don't even have to condemn you. Why, you've done it yourself by the things you've said. Look at what you said. Everybody can see what a bad person you are just from what you just said. That's what Eliphaz thinks anyway. Verse 7, "Art thou the first man who was ever born? Wast thou brought forth before the hills were made?" So he's now answering Job's argument that they think they're the people. Remember Job 7, you think you're the people and wisdom will die with you. He says, who do you think you are, Job? You think you're the first man who was ever born? Man, there's Adam. You think you're the first Adam? Maybe you came before Adam, Job. Maybe you're the one older than Adam, wiser than him. Maybe you were brought forth before the hills. Adam was brought forth after the hills. Maybe you think you were brought forth first. Verse 8, "Elohah's secret counsel didst thou hear? And to his wisdom canst thou e'er attain?" So he says, maybe you were there to hear Elohah's secret counsel. Elohah means the venerable God, the God who is worthy to be worshipped. Maybe you heard God's secret counsel that no one else heard because they weren't around. Or maybe you're as wise as Elohah. Maybe you think you can attain to his wisdom by your own thinking. Well, this is very interesting because I would ask, which of Eliphaz's arguments don't apply to Eliphaz himself as much as they do to Job? I mean, Eliphaz wasn't the first man who was there before Adam. Eliphaz wasn't there before the hills were made. Eliphaz can't attain to Elohah's secret counsel or his wisdom. But he casts these things at Job as if they just applied to Job, and Eliphaz is sitting on the high, superior position and looking down at Job. Verse 9, "What knowest thou that is not known to us? What understandest thou that we do not?" He says, Job, you don't have any special knowledge more than we do. Again, answering Job's sarcasm. thinking they were the beginning and ending of wisdom. He says, well, you don't know any more than we do. Verse 10, the gray-haired and the aged is with us, more full of days than thine own father was. So he says, Job, if you want venerability, saying we're the people and we think wisdom will die with us. Well, he says, if you want venerability, guess what, Job? The old men would argue just like we do. The old men are on our side. Why, someone older even than your father, Job, he would be on our side. So he seems to take some of Bildad's line of human tradition, of the old, going way back, thinking the same thing. Verse 11, God's comfortings, are they too small for thee? Or is there any secret sin with thee? So he says, is El, the mighty God, is his comfort too small for you, Job? In other words, that he just comforts good men? Job has argued, why don't, if you have these days marked out for how long a person lives, why do you torment that person while he lives those days? Why don't you just leave him alone, let him live those days out, and then decide what you're going to do with him? Well, I'll tell you what, that's exactly what God is doing in the dispensation of grace. He's just pouring forth the riches of his grace. He's not punishing any wicked or blessing, favoring any righteous. But he says, is that too small for you, Job, that God just comforts good men? He says, is there any secret sin with thee? He says, isn't the reality that you have a secret sin and that's why God doesn't comfort you? That's why God doesn't leave you alone? Isn't that true, Job? I know it is. I know it is. Admit it, Job. Admit it. Admit it. Verse 12, why let thy feelings carry thee away? What meaneth then this quivering of thine eyes? So he says, Job, you're just letting your emotions get the best of you. If you would just stop being so emotional, Job, and Job has already argued, how can you blame me for being emotional? Look what's happened to me. He says, oh, Job, if you would just stop being so emotional and just be calm and logical and thoughtful like we are, why, you would see that we're right. And he refers to something in Job's appearance, the way he moves his eyes. Oh, I can just see from the way you move your eyes, Job. How frantic you are, how upset you are, how you're not really thinking clearly like we are. Well, Eliphaz, good luck not having your emotions carry you away if you were in a situation like Job is in. I mean, very nice to say such things when your children are all safe back at home and your wealth is all safe. Your animals are all safe in their pens and your servants are all still alive. It's nice for you to sit and talk about, oh, don't let your feelings get carried away. I don't let my feelings get carried away. Well, that's very easy to say, Eliphaz. Verse 13, that thou shouldst turn thy rage against thy God and cause such words to issue from thy mouth. So he says, Job, you turn your rage, and that's what Bullinger translated rage, that's the Hebrew ruach, your spirit. In this case, I think yes, meaning is angry spirit. You turn your angry spirit against God. That's El, the mighty God again. And therefore you let such words leave your mouth. So he thinks Job is clearly guilty for letting such words leave his mouth. Job, if you were a good, innocent person, you wouldn't have let yourself say such things. Job has said, I have to speak or I die. I can't just hold in the fact that I'm innocent. He says, Job, you've just let yourself get carried away or you wouldn't say such things. Again, because he thinks Job knows deep down he's guilty and is just covering it. Verse 14, what is a mortal that he should be pure, or he of woman born that he be just? So he says, what's a mortal? And that's the Hebrew enosh, which means man as subject to death. That he should be pure, or he of woman born, that's Isha. Again, he's taking Job's language and using it against him. He says, Adam born of Isha. He says, Enosh, mortal man born of Isha. He says, who is he that he should be just? Well, this is how he argued the first time, remember? This is what he said the first time. He said a mortal can't be pure. He of Isha born can't be just. Verse 15, lo, in his holy ones he puts no faith. The very heavens in his sight are not pure. And I think very much Eliphaz is going back to his argument from his first address. Remember back in Job chapter 4 that the big deal Eliphaz made about this experience he had. Remember, Eliphaz argues from human experience. this experience he had where he encountered a spirit in the nighttime. And it was scary. And I saw this form without a form. And this image without solidity was before my eyes. And I heard this voice saying to me, remember Job 4:17, can mortal man more righteous be than Eloah, God? Or boastful man before his maker pure? In his own servants he will put no trust. His angels he will charge with ignorance. How much more those who dwell in houses made of clay, with their foundations laid in dust? So frail they will be crushed before a moth. So this was what this spirit told him, and this experience he had. And now he's going back to that, making that same argument based on his experience. What he thought he knew because his spirit had told him. That God puts no faith in his holy ones, probably referring to his angels. He doesn't even put any faith in his angels. And the very heavens in his sight are not pure. The most exalted beings in his sight are not pure. Verse 16, how much less man, corrupt, defiled? Yea, man who drinks like water his iniquity. So he says, how much less pure then is man, Ish, man? Well, men, he says, are just corrupt and defiled. He says, who drinks like water his iniquity. We could say men swim in iniquity like fish swim in water. So how can they be pure? Well, there is some truth in this, certainly. There is some truth in it. We are surrounded by iniquity. We've lived in iniquity. We've lived with sin our whole lives. We can't really grasp the idea of being a perfect sinless being because it's so foreign to our thinking and our way of life. So there's certainly some truth to what Eliphaz says, but remember that his real argument is against Job. Oh, Job, you can't be as good as you claim. In fact, you must be worse than average. You must be a bad person to have these things happen to you. But the very fact that you're claiming that you are good and didn't do anything to deserve this, it just shows how wrong you are, Job, he says, like the Spirit said to me. So those were his answers to Job's argument, his reasoning. So now he goes on and gives his view of God's dealings, of how God acts. Verse 17, give heed to me, and I will thee instruct, and that which I have seen I will declare. So he says now that he's going to instruct Job. He's going to instruct him about God based on what he's seen and what he's experienced. And again, like he did the first time in his first address, Eliphaz looks to his own experiences for guidance. And he thinks his experiences will show him the truth. Verse 18, which wise men plainly have made known to us, and have not hid them, truths their fathers taught. So again, he builds his argument as well on the experiences of men of the past, adding in some ways some of Bildad's arguments from human tradition to his own. Saying men of the past have experienced and known these same things that I've experienced and known. So it's not just my personal experiences. People of the past have experienced the same thing, Job. Verse 19, the men to whom alone the land was given, and among whom no alien passed, they said. So he says that these were the original men of the land. So we could say post-flood, these were the ones who went out to the land first. The first ones on the land. The first ones who saw no foreigner walking among them because there were no foreigners. The land was empty, and they were the first ones into it. They were the first to settle the land. And all the way back to that, he says, this is what they've known, this is what they've experienced, and this is what they said about it. And what did they say, according to Eliphaz, that matched up his experience? Verse 20, the wicked sorely labors all his days, his years reserved for the oppressor's greed. So Eliphaz says this is the wisdom that all these men of the past have learned, and that is that the wicked live a hard life. Oh, those wicked, they just live a hard life. Why, those people who are wicked, everything they gain, everything they earn. Maybe they do manage to earn and gain for a while, but they'll end up giving all that they gain to an oppressor. How does that sound familiar? Someone who everything he gained was given to an oppressor. Oh, that happened to Job, didn't it? Remember those raiders who stole a lot of his wealth, that which wasn't burned up by fire from heaven? The oppressor stole it. Well, now this is a very nice argument of Eliphaz. The wicked man gives his goods to the oppressor's greed. But I have just one question, Eliphaz. What about the oppressor? What about the thief? What about the raider? Isn't he wicked? To raid what belonged to other people, to take their goods, to take what didn't belong to him? Isn't he wicked? What happens to him? He ends up with this other man's wealth. What happens to him? Suddenly he's rich. Suddenly he's enriched off the goods of someone else. How is that fair? Isn't your argument kind of one-sided there, Eliphaz? Focusing on the one raided and not looking at this wicked raider and what he gets out of it? Well, this runs all the way through. This hypocritical nature runs all the way through these arguments of Job's friends. His ears are reserved for the oppressor's greed, but what happened to the oppressor for his greed? Verse 21, a voice of terror ever fills his ears, and when he prospers, then the spoiler comes. He speaks of this wicked person, and he says his ears are full of terror. Where did Eliphaz get that idea? What does that sound like? Let me think. Oh, yes, I have it. Job, back in 13:21, when he pled with God, thy hand from off me take thou far away, nor let thy terror fill me with alarm. So he says, the wicked men are full of terror. A voice of terror fills his ears. You see what Eliphaz is doing. He's looking at Job, looking at Job's experiences and saying, your experiences prove your wickedness. What happens to you proves your wickedness. So he's looking at Job and saying, Job, wicked people, all their good go to oppressors. All the good things you had, your flocks and everything, they went to oppressors. Job, a wicked man, his ears are full of terror. Job, your ears are full of terror. What does this tell you, Job? When he prospers, the spoiler comes. What happened to Job? He prospered and the spoiler came. Verse 22, he has no hope from darkness to return, and thinks that he is destined for the sword. So wicked people, they think they have no hope to return from the darkness. They think that turning around and being good can't save them, that God won't deliver them if they turn around and submit to him. Just like you, Job. You think you can't take our advice and turn around to God and turn from your wicked ways and be good and God will make everything better. Well, that's how the wicked think, Job. You think you're destined to die, Job, that nothing short of your death could save you? Well, that's what a wicked person thinks. He thinks he's destined for the sword too. Verse 23, he wanders forth and asks, oh, where is bread? Well knowing that a dark day draweth nigh. He says this wicked person is hungry. He's looking for food. And knowing that all he has to look forward to is dark days. All he has to look forward to is dark days. Sad, huh? What sad condition you're in, Job, you wicked person. Verse 24, distress and anguish fill him with alarm. They overpower him like a warrior's charge. And, I can't help but think that as Eliphaz is saying this, he's looking at Job and describing him, describing how he views him. So I've said that he's like, to use our modern expression, of course, they didn't have a dictionary, but the modern expression people would say, you look up the dictionary and you see your picture next to this word, when you say someone is, just perfect example of some such thing. Well, he's doing that with wickedness. He's saying if you looked up wickedness in the dictionary, Job, your picture would be there. Because he's describing the wicked person and describing Job. Saying, Job, you look exactly like what happens to a wicked person. Look up wicked in the dictionary and your face is next to the definition. So, distress and anguish fill the wicked with alarm, overpower him like a warrior's charge, just like has happened to you, Job. Verse 25, because he stretched out his hand against God, and haughtily El Shaddai did defy. So he says, this is why these things happened to him. He stretched out his hand against El, the mighty God. He says, I know that's what you did, Job. And he defied El Shaddai, the powerful, all-bountiful God. I know that's what you did, Job. Verse 26, because he used to run with stiffened neck against him with the bosses of his shield. He says, this wicked person, you, Job, you must have had a stiff neck before God before. You wouldn't bow to him. You wouldn't submit to him. You held on to your wickedness. You must have run against God with a shield. say I'm going contrary to God, but I know I have a shield that can protect me. And God can't hurt me. That's what he must have thought, Job. Verse 27, because his face he clothed with his own fat, and gathered rolls of fat upon his loins. Now we probably have a little trouble with this one, because we think of fat very differently than they did back in that day. Fat is something undesirable. You get too fat, you're overweight, you need to lose weight. You go on some diet to put off some of those pounds. That's how we think of fat. But see, they thought of fat very differently, because really only the prosperous can afford to be fat. And we've kind of lost that understanding in our society. And sometimes you'll actually see fat people out begging on the street and acting like they're so poor. And you look at them and think, if you're really so poor, how can you afford to be fat? But the fact is that in a really poor society, only the prosperous can afford to be fat. And thinness and poverty go hand in hand. So fat symbolizes prosperity and ease. So he thinks, Job, you clothed yourself with your own fat. You thought it would be your protection. And you just took it easy. You gathered rolls of fat upon your loins. Instead of going out and doing good works and taking care of the poor and living a good life, Job, you just took it easy, covering yourselves with rolls of fat, with prosperity and ease. Now this was just slander, for Job had always cared about the poor, as Job himself will argue later, truthfully. Verse 28, therefore he dwelleth in a ruined place, in houses where none other deigns to live, in places destined to be ruinous heaps. So he describes Job's current sad condition of living in a ruined home, in houses where no one else would deign to live, this ash heap he's sitting on, places destined to be ruined heaps because there's no one to keep them up anymore. Well, he says, Job, your sad condition, that's the inevitable outcome of the iniquity of the wicked. You sitting here on the ruins of your former life, that's what happens to wicked people. Verse 29, he will not long be rich, nor will his wealth endure, nor will his shadow lengthen out. So Eliphaz says, the wicked don't prosper long, Job. You're learning that now. The wicked don't keep their wealth very long. And perfection there, as the King James Version has translated it, is of doubtful meaning. And Bullinger refers to the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, that makes it a shadow instead of perfection. So nor will his shadow lengthen out, is how he translates it. And his shadow seems to be his influence. His influence will not grow. And Job had talked about man being brief like a shadow. Eliphaz says, no, it's the wicked who's brief like a shadow. Well, really? So he's denying Job's argument that good people die too? He's saying, no, good people don't die. Good people don't disappear like a shadow. Is that really what you're saying, Eliphaz? Verse 30, from darkness he will never more escape. His tender branch the flame shall wither up. In God's hot anger he will pass away. So he says the wicked, he won't escape from darkness. The branch of the wicked, it'll wither. And then in God's hot anger, and that's the ruach, the spirit of God's mouth, he's going to pass away due to God's anger. God will blow the spirit of his hot anger on him, and he'll pass away because of it. Just like it's happening to you, Job. Just like what's happening to you. You're wicked, Eliphaz says. Verse 31, let no one put his faith in vain deceit, for vanity will be his recompense. Oh, that's a nice proverb, isn't it? Well, he obviously thinks Job trusted in deceit. Oh, Job, you thought you could fool everyone, making out that you're so righteous when really you weren't. But vanity, emptiness is your recompense. When you act like that, when you try to deceive people into thinking you're righteous when you're not, well, you'll just end up empty. So he said, we can all learn a lesson from Job. That's what Eliphaz says. Verse 32, and he will be cut off before his time, so that his palm will not be always green. So he says, a wicked person will be cut off before his time or day of death. He says, Job, you're counting in that calendar God has when you have marked off your day of death. Well, guess what? Wicked will be cut off before that day. Like you've been, Job. He'll be like a palm. A palm should always be green. Yet here's a palm that's not green. Well, that's what a wicked person is like. He withers before his time. He turns brown before his time. Verse 33 is, shaketh off the vine its unripe fruit, whereas the olive casts away its flower. So should a vine shake off its fruit, its grapes, before they're ripe? No, of course not. Should an olive cast away its flower before it develops into olives? No, of course not. That would be most unwelcome for any vine grower or olive grower. If that happened, he says that's what happens to a wicked person. This happens before his time. Verse 34, so will the household of the vile be naught, and fire consume the tents of the corrupt. He says this is what happens to the household of the vile. And the word Muldrow's translated household there is often translated congregation. It's the Hebrew adah. And it means a congregation or a gathering. In this case, I think like a family gathering. Basically a family all gathered together into a household. He says that the family of this wicked person, the household, the adah of this wicked person will come to nothing. Guess what? Just like Job, like your family's come to nothing. Look, Job, all your children are dead. And your wife has abandoned you, saying, curse God and die. Well, that's what happens to the adah, the household, the congregation of the wicked. And fire consumes his tents. And that's another low blow on top of Eliphaz's many low blows, because remember, fire had consumed some of Job's wealth, fire from heaven. Verse 35, for evil they conceive, and mischief bear. Their heart doth travail with iniquity. So he concludes his saying that supposedly what all the old men said from their experience, what happens to people. He says this is what happens to people when they conceive evil, when they conceive calamitous works, and bear mischief, bring forth mischief. This happens to people like that, Job. Because their heart travailed, it worked hard with iniquity, it worked to do iniquity. And so all this calamity happens to them. So again, Eliphaz is describing the wicked man using Job as the example. Job, you're exhibit A of a wicked man. Like I said, your picture is next to wicked man in the dictionary, Job. And all I have to do is look at you and I can see what happens to wicked people. What an argument Eliphaz had. So in this portion, Eliphaz argues that Job's words take away all impetus to reverence Eloah, since all who serve him do so hoping he'll give them a happy, easy life. Notice that's the same argument Satan had. Job only serves you, God, because you give him a happy, easy life. So Eliphaz agrees with Satan. He describes Job as raging with emotion and speaking unadvisedly. He said, Job, if you would just calm down and be logical and reasonable like we are, you'd agree with us. He thinks mortal man can't be pure with God. He repeats his lesson he got supposedly from this spirit encounter he had, his experience. So he says, Job, you claim to be clear, to be pure and clean. You must be far worse than you claim. He argues that God brings calamity on wicked people. He just looks at Job as exhibit A and describes Job as being the wicked man. What happens to the wicked man is what happened to Job. And in his mind, Job's calamity clearly reveals that Job must have been wicked. And what do we see in Eliphaz's cruel, heartless words? Well, we see the mockery of Satan, trying to drive that wedge in between Job and God. As Job's enemy and God's enemy, trying to turn Job against the God he cared about and served. And how will Job respond? What will he say to Eliphaz's second address? Well, we will study that next time. Thank you for watching. And if you enjoyed this, please click like below. And until we meet again around the pages of God's book, I bid you goodbye.